Evelyn Carter had always known her life would not belong entirely to her. Being the daughter of Charles Carter, railroad investor, land baron, and one of the wealthiest men on the frontier, meant expectations were laid on her shoulders, long before she even understood their weight. Still, she had hoped that somewhere in that future she would have the freedom to choose something for herself. But that hope died the evening her father announced her engagement to General Richard Hayes. It happened during the grandest dinner party her father had ever hosted. The long table gleamed under lantern light. Crystal glasses sparkled like ice, and wealthy men slapped each other's backs as if prosperity were their personal invention. Evelyn sat quietly beside her father, wearing a gown chosen not for comfort but prestige. She tried to smile, tried to breathe, tried to be the dutiful daughter her father expected. General Hayes, tall and polished in his stiff uniform, raised his glass and announced with a triumphant grin, "To the future, Mrs. Hayes." The room erupted with applause. Evelyn's heart sank. She hadn't known about the engagement. Her father had not whispered a word, nor had the general ever asked for her opinion, let alone her hand. The decision had been made in a backroom handshake, sealed with promises of military protection and business expansion. She realized then, with an ache that settled deep in her bones, that she was not being married for love. She was being traded. After the announcement, the general approached her with a proud smile. "You will find life as my wife more comfortable than anything you have known," he said, as if comfort had ever been her goal. His hand hovered near hers, claiming without touching. Everything about him felt rigid: his posture, his voice, his certainty that she would obey without question. Evelyn nodded politely, but inside her mind screamed. That night she stood alone on the balcony overlooking the dark plains. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky, wild and free. How unfair, she thought, that the heavens could roam wherever they wished while she was trapped in a life drawn out for her like railroad tracks, straight, rigid, unchanging. Days passed quickly after that. Preparations for her journey to Fort Ironwood filled every hour. Her wedding dress was ordered. Her trunks were packed. Her father kissed her forehead, pleased and proud, never noticing the hollowness in her eyes. It was decided that she would travel to the fort escorted by a small military unit, her arrival to be a grand gesture of her new status. Evelyn said nothing. She buried her fears quietly, like letters she would never send. On the morning of departure, she climbed into the wagon that awaited her. The soldiers mounted their horses, ready to escort her through the canyon pass. The general would be waiting for her at the fort, eager to parade his new bride in front of the officers. As the wheels began to roll, Evelyn allowed herself one last look at the land behind her, her home, her freedom slipping away. She whispered into the wind, "I wish my life were mine." But wishes were fragile things on the frontier. What Evelyn did not know, what no one knew, was that fate had begun to stir in the red dust of the canyon. Eyes watched from the cliffs. The strongest Apache warrior waited in the shadows, ready to change the course of her life forever. Road to the general would never be completed, and the woman who felt she had no choice was about to meet the one man who would give her back her freedom by taking her away. The canyon was a place of shadows and echoing silence, where every sound seemed doubled and every shape uncertain. The soldiers escorting Evelyn kept close ranks as they rode between the towering red walls. Their horses snorted nervously, sensing what the men did not. The lieutenant in charge tried to reassure Evelyn with stiff politeness, but she could tell he too felt something was wrong. Canyon air was too still, too watchful. Evelyn clutched the side of the wagon as they moved deeper into the pass. "How much longer?" she asked, pretending her voice didn't tremble. "An hour, maybe two," the lieutenant answered. "We'll be out before noon." But noon would never come, not the way they expected. A hawk shrieked overhead, slicing through the quiet. The soldiers exchanged wary glances. One reached for his rifle dot, and then the world erupted. A thunderous war cry burst from the cliffs above. Horses reared. Soldiers shouted. Evelyn's heart vaulted into her throat. Arrows rained down in a deadly arc, clattering against rocks and striking the dirt with vicious speed. The wagon jolted as the driver ducked for cover. Ambush! Take cover! The lieutenant roared. Evelyn froze, paralyzed by the sudden chaos. The canyon walls shook with the sound of hooves, a wave of Apache warriors charging with breathtaking precision. They rode with the wind itself, bare-chested, faces painted, horses expertly maneuvered through the narrow terrain. Everything about them was swift, fierce, alive. One rider led them, larger, faster, moving with an authority that required no words. His long black hair streamed behind him like a banner. Muscles tightened across his arms as he drew back his bow and released arrow after arrow with unerring accuracy. Though Evelyn did not yet know his name. The canyon already whispered it. A soldier lunged for her, attempting to pull her from the wagon to safety. But the wagon tilted dangerously as the driver fell, struck by an arrow. Evelyn stumbled onto the ground, dust rising around her in a choking cloud. A shadow fell over her. She looked up and found herself staring into the eyes of the strongest Apache warrior. They were dark, intense, shaped by a life of survival. He wasn't breathing hard, despite the fight around him. His expression was unreadable, but something in it made Evelyn's fear stutter and pause. He leaned down from his horse and spoke a sharp order in Apache. Two warriors seized the fallen wagon, pushing it aside so it wouldn't crush her. He didn't have to help her. He didn't have to notice her at all. But he did. A soldier fired at him, and in a blur the warrior leaped from his horse, pulling Evelyn behind a boulder with him, shielding her with his own body. She felt his strength like a wall behind her, steady and warm. Don't hurt me," she whispered, breath trembling. He looked down at her, not with cruelty, but with something closer to curiosity. He responded in accented English, voice low and rough. "You stay." "Not hurt." Before she could speak again, he lifted her effortlessly, placing her onto his horse. The touch was firm but careful. As if she were something fragile he refused to break. "Why are you taking me?" She gasped out. His jaw tightened. For a moment, she saw pain, memory flash in his eyes. "Because," he said, mounting behind her, "your people take from us. Today, we take back." He clicked his tongue, and the horse surged forward. The canyon blurred around them. Gunfire faded behind them. The soldiers disappeared into the dust. Evelyn clung to the horse's mane, heart pounding not just from fear, but from the impossible truth forming inside her. The man who had taken her was not a monster, and the life she had been forced into was ending with every thunderous stride. The Apache camp lay hidden among jagged cliffs, dusted with sun and shadow. Fires glowed faintly in the late afternoon, smoke curling toward the wide sky. Evelyn had never seen anything like it. Teepees clustered in precise order, warriors moving with deliberate purpose, children laughing and running barefoot across the red earth. Everything was alive, yet calm. Ordered, yet wild. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She had been taught that the Apache were merciless, fierce, untamed. But what she saw now unsettled her further. They were not monsters. They were human. And at the center of it all, she realized, was the man who had captured her. Taza dismounted first, his horse stepping lightly even on the uneven ground. Evelyn followed reluctantly, guided by a firm hand at her elbow. Despite the roughness of the journey, she noticed something she hadn't expected: care. Not a touch meant to frighten, not a word spoken to belittle, only a steady presence that somehow made her feel less alone. he led her to a small teepee at the edge of the camp. Smoke drifted lazily from its top, and inside, blankets were folded neatly and the floor was swept clean. It was modest, yet orderly, and it felt like the first safe place she had known since the ambush. "You rest," Taza said, voice low. It wasn't commanding. It was protective. She nodded, unable to trust herself to speak. He did not leave immediately. Instead, he stood at the entrance, scanning the camp with those sharp, dark eyes. Evelyn studied him from the shadows, trying to decipher the man beneath the warrior mask. His body was strong, broader than any man she had ever seen. Every movement precise, controlled, but there was restraint in him. A restraint that hinted at discipline. Even honored. After a long moment, he finally spoke again. "You hungry?" Evelyn blinked. The question startled her, not because it was strange, but because it was ordinary. Simple. Kind. She hesitated, then nodded. Taza disappeared briefly and returned with a bowl of roasted venison and a slice of cornbread. His hand offered the food carefully, and she realized she was trembling. Hunger, fatigue, and fear all mingled into something raw and unfamiliar. As she ate, she noticed him watching, not in a possessive way, but with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Every action he took, from straightening a fallen spear to checking the fire, radiated confidence and control. Yet beneath it, she sensed something else, a quiet, hidden strength, tempered by thoughtfulness. He was a man who could dominate a battlefield, but he chose gentleness with her. "Why? Why don't you hurt me?" she asked softly, unable to contain her curiosity. Taza paused, looking at her as though weighing his answer. Finally, he said simply, "Not yours to fear me." The words were strange, broken English, but the meaning was clear. He did not see her as an enemy, nor as a prize. She was human. She was separate. And in that separation, she found herself oddly relieved and unsettled. Relief because she wasn't in danger. Unsettled because no man had ever regarded her this way. Evelyn lay on the blankets that night, listening to the camp's quiet rhythm. Fires crackled, distant voices murmured, and somewhere a drum beat softly. But all she could think of was him, the silent warrior whose hands had held her with strength, yet careful precision, whose eyes seemed to read something in her that she had never shared with anyone. Sleep came fitfully. But when it did, it was under the watch of the strongest Apache warrior she had ever met. And deep in her chest, she felt the first spark of something she could not name, something dangerous, thrilling and impossible. Curiosity. Curiosity about the man. Curiosity about the world she had never known. And perhaps the faintest hint of desire to see what he would do next. Back at Fort Ironwood, General Richard Hayes paced the wide, wooden floor of his office, a storm gathering in his sharp blue eyes. The news of Evelyn's capture had arrived on a riderless horse, the letter pinned to the saddle. The words were brief, almost mocking. "She is with us now. She is safe, but she is ours." Taza. The general crumpled the note in his hands, his jaw tight with rage. "Safe?" He spat. "Safe? That Apache he dares to call this. Safe?" His age shifted uneasily. They had never seen him so enraged. Hayes's reputation had been built on control, on commanding men, on bending the land to his will. Nothing had ever defied him like this. Not storms, not rival generals, not even rebels. But a single Apache warrior, hiding in the cliffs of the canyon, had stolen what he believed belonged to him. "I want every man ready," he barked. "We ride at first light. We take back what is ours. That girl is mine. I will not be humiliated by savages in the mountains." One of his lieutenants, a wiry officer with keen eyes, hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, the canyon is treacherous. They know it well. If we attack..." Hayes slammed a fist onto the table. If we attack, we will attack. She will be returned to me. I will not have my honor questioned by any of them. Not Taza, not his warriors, not anyone. The office fell silent except for the sound of Hayes's heavy breathing. His officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer simply about a woman, they all knew it. It was about power, pride, control. The general's wrath threatened to drag the fort. The soldiers and Evelyn into a war neither she nor anyone else had asked for. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat alone in the teepee, her thoughts restless as a rattlesnake in the red dust. Taza had gone to meet with his council, leaving her with only the sounds of the camp, the laughter of children, the crackle of fires, and the soft murmur of the wind through the canyon walls. She had expected fear to dominate her mind, yet something else pressed against her chest. Worry, not for herself. For Taga, she thought of the way he had shielded her during the ambush, the way he had guided her safely through the chaos, the way he had spoken with patience and care. She had never felt this way about any man, and yet, the thought of losing him to Hayes, watching the general send soldiers to burn the Apache from their land, made her stomach twist in knots. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could she stop him? Could she plead for mercy? Could she even survive if war came? And deeper still, a terrifying thought. What if she realized she didn't want to be saved by anyone else? At dawn, the first sound of the approaching riders echoed through the canyon. Soldiers on horseback, led by General Hayes himself, were already moving into position, their armor glinting like silver against the red rocks. Dust rose in thick clouds, carried by the wind. Somewhere an arrow twanged, cutting through the tension of the morning. Taza returned to the teepee, his face calm but his eyes dark with warning. "They come," he said simply. Evelyn nodded, heart racing. She understood, at that moment, that her choice, or the lack of it, was about to ignite a conflict far larger than her own fate. The man who had once been a stranger, now a protector, would have to stand against one of the most powerful men she had ever known, and she would stand beside him not as a prize, not as a hostage, but as someone who had begun to understand what it truly meant to be free. The Apache camp was alive with purpose. Yet a quiet tension hummed beneath the rhythm of daily life. Warriors sharpened weapons, scouts moved along cliff edges, and the elders consulted in low voices. Evelyn watched it all from the teepee's entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fascination. She had expected captivity to feel suffocating. Yet somehow, in this place of dust and firelight, she felt more alive than she ever had with her father or the general. Taza returned from a council meeting, the lines of his face sharpened by worry. He moved with the same steady precision as always, yet she noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. His people were strong, disciplined, but General Hayes was a force to be reckoned with, and the threat of war loomed over them like a dark cloud. "You cannot return," Evelyn said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence as she met his gaze. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was firm. "If you send me back to him, I will not go quietly. I will not be a possession. I belong elsewhere. With you, or not at all." Taza's eyes darkened for a moment, his lips tightening. He remained silent, listening, as he always did, as if weighing her words against the gravity of what they meant. The canyon wind rustled, carrying dust across the ground, and Evelyn thought she could hear the beating of his heart, strong, controlled, and utterly human beneath the stoic exterior. "You speak of choice," he said finally, his broken English careful, deliberate. "In your land, men take. You are told. This is life, not yours." "Yes," she admitted. "I have been told all my life. But I cannot live that way anymore, not if it means being someone's prize, someone's property." He studied her silently, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he moved closer. Every step he took carried strength, but also an undeniable care. He stopped just short of her, letting the space between them hold a weight all its own. "You stay here," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Not yours to send. Not yours to take. Promise." Evelyn's chest tightened. His promise wasn't just protection, it was a declaration of respect, a recognition of her humanity. It was the first time anyone had ever treated her as more than a piece of a larger game. The air between them was charged, not with lust, not yet, but with something far more dangerous, trust. She realized for the first time that she had begun to hope. Hope not for a return to the life she had been forced into, but for a life she could claim for herself. A life where fear was replaced by courage, where obedience was replaced by choice. And in the midst of that hope, a strange, intoxicating feeling stirred in her chest, an attraction she could not yet name. Taza turned slightly, glancing toward the cliffs where scouts moved silently, watching for signs of the approaching general. "They come," he said quietly. "But you safe?" "I keep promise." Evelyn swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to say more, to tell him everything, her fear, her gratitude, the strange flutter of something new inside her, but words faltered. Instead, she nodded, understanding that his promise was more than protection. It was an invitation to trust, to begin to let someone see her truly. For the first time since her betrothal, Evelyn felt the stirrings of defiance, not reckless, not foolish, but resolute. She would not be forced into a life she did not choose. She would not be a pawn in a man's war or a father's ambition. And if she had any courage left, she would stand beside Taza, the silent warrior whose strength was matched only by the depth of his heart. As the sun dipped lower behind the canyon walls, the camp settled into the quiet hum of the evening. Evelyn watched Taza move among his people, disciplined, commanding, yet gentle. And she realized that in a world defined by rules she had never agreed to, she had found her first real ally. And perhaps, though she could not yet admit it even to herself, the first man who could truly capture her heart. Days passed in a rhythm foreign to Evelyn, yet strangely comforting. The Apache camp moved with the precision of a living organism, each person contributing to the survival of all. Children played near the fires, elders taught lessons of the land, and warriors honed their skills. Through it all, Taza moved like a force of nature, strong, commanding, and yet careful. And Evelyn found herself watching him more than she dared admit. The first morning after Hayes's ultimatum arrived, Taza approached her with a quiet determination. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the edge of the canyon. "Learn." Evelyn hesitated, unsure what he meant. But as she followed him, she realized she was about to see the world through his eyes. He taught her to read the land, how to spot the tracks of animals, how to sense the coming of storms, and how to move silently across uneven ground. His hands guided hers as they examined leaves and rocks. His voice, low and patient, explained what she had never imagined. "Like this," he said, adjusting her grip on a bow. "Do not fight with strength alone. Use mind, use senses, balance." She looked up at him, cheeks flushed with effort and embarrassment. "I don't know if I can." She began. Taza's gaze softened, but there was no pity. "You can, must." There was an intensity in his eyes that unsettled her, not fear, but something far more complicated. Every glance, every word, every gesture carried weight. And yet, it was careful, measured. He did not invade her space. Yet somehow the proximity of his body, the warmth of his presence, made her pulse race. By the third day, she found herself laughing at small things he said, correcting his attempts at English with a mischievous grin. Not me do this, she said, shaking her head. You say, I do this. Taza tried again, and she caught herself watching him, memorizing the way his strong jaw moved, the way his dark eyes focused so completely on her. For the first time, Evelyn felt a thrill that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with curiosity and something stronger, though she did not dare name it. They practiced riding across the canyon together. He placed her carefully behind him, his arm steady around her waist. Each time she leaned into him for balance, her heart seemed to catch in her throat. She could feel the power of his body beneath hers, the rhythm of the horse beneath both of them, and the stark, beautiful wildness of the land around them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the red cliffs and shadows stretched long across the camp, they sat together by a fire, silent except for the crackling flames. Taza offered her a piece of roasted venison, and she accepted, their fingers brushing lightly. The contact was fleeting, but it left her skin tingling. Why? Why do you help me? She asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Taza's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. You? Not belong to anyone who takes. You? Belong where free. I protect. The words were simple, but the meaning was profound. Evelyn realized she had never met a man who looked at her as a person, rather than as an object, a prize, or a pawn. And in that realization, something inside her began to shift by the time night fell and she retreated to her blankets. Evelyn's thoughts were restless. Every lesson, every brush of his hand, every glance felt like a pull she could not resist. She understood, with a mixture of thrill and fear, that the Apache warrior had already begun to capture her heart, and she knew that when the storm came the war, the choices, the danger, it would not only test her courage, but the fragile, undeniable connection that was growing between them. The dawn air was crisp, carrying the tang of dust and pine from the canyon cliffs. Evelyn stirred beneath her blankets, the weight of the past days pressing on her like a stone. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the Apache camp, the quiet discipline, the purposeful movements, the sense of belonging she had never known. Yet today, a shadow fell over that fragile sense of peace. Taza returned from the cliffs, his face drawn and serious. They come, he said simply, his broken English deliberate. There was no panic in his tone, only warning. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. She knew immediately he meant General Hayes. Within hours, scouts reported the approach of the fort's cavalry. Dust clouds rose in the distance like ominous smoke signaling the coming storm. The Apache warriors readied themselves, checking bows, arrows, and spears. Even the women and children prepared, moving with quiet efficiency that spoke of generations surviving in a harsh and unforgiving land. Evelyn's heart raced as she watched the camp mobilize. Taza, will they hurt you? Will they hurt the others? She asked, her voice trembling. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the canyon walls, eyes narrowing. Finally, he spoke, low and measured. They take everything. Not just you. Land, people, life must stop. Evelyn understood the gravity of the situation. The man who had taken her to this place was not merely protecting her. He was defending an entire way of life, a world she had only glimpsed in the past few days, a world she had already come to care for deeply. Fear mingled with admiration, and she felt her heart stir in ways she had never imagined. By midday, the cavalry had crested the ridge, led by General Hayes himself. His uniform glinted in the sun, polished and imposing, a stark contrast to the earthy tones of the Apache camp. A rider detached from the group, carrying a letter, and delivered it to Taza. Evelyn watched as Taza unfolded the note. His expression remained unreadable, but his jaw tightened imperceptibly. He read it aloud, slowly, each word deliberate, Return the girl immediately, or I will burn your camp and take what is mine by force. No mercy will be given." General R. Hayes, the camp fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Taza's dark eyes swept over the gathered warriors, assessing, calculating. Then he turned to Evelyn, and for the first time she saw the weight of responsibility he carried, not just for her, but for everyone in the camp. They want war, he said quietly. You not go back. I protect. Must fight. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had imagined being rescued by someone, but this was not rescue. This was defiance, resistance, a test of courage she had never thought she possessed. And suddenly, she realized that her choice mattered not just to her, but to the man who had risked everything to give her freedom. "I won't go back," she said, her voice firm, though her hands shook. "Not to him. Not to anyone who sees me as property. I belong. Here. With you, or nowhere." Taza's eyes darkened, the silent fire in his gaze meeting hers. For a long moment, they stood together, two souls bound by a fragile trust and a growing, undeniable bond. Then, with a sudden command, he turned to the warriors. "Prepare. Stand fast. Protect home. Protect people. Protect her." The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Arrows would fly, men would clash, and the canyon would shake with the fury of pride and defiance. Evelyn clenched her fists, feeling a fierce resolve rise within her. This was not just about survival. It was about love, honor, and a choice she would never surrender. And deep in her chest, she knew that whatever came, she would stand beside the strongest Apache warrior, ready to face the storm with him. The Apache camp bristled with preparation. Yet within the tense rhythm of war readiness, a quieter storm brewed in Evelyn's chest. The sun cast long shadows across the red earth, illuminating the dust and sweat of the warriors as they readied themselves for the inevitable clash with General Hayes's cavalry. And amidst it all, her thoughts remained focused on Taza. Since the ambush, since the days of lessons and laughter, her heart had been drawn to him in ways she could neither name nor resist. It had begun as curiosity, grown into trust, and now threatened to consume her completely. She had been betrothed to a general she did not love, promised to a life of duty and control. But here, among the cliffs, the fires, and the people who called Taza leader, protector, and warrior, she felt something she had never known: freedom. That freedom carried a weight of choice, and she realized she had to embrace it. If she was to live truly, she could not be returned to the life she had been handed. She could not go back to a man who saw her as a possession, a pawn in a larger game. She belonged only where her heart was, where she felt safe, seen, and alive. "Taza," she said quietly, seeking him out among the warriors as he adjusted the line of sentries along the canyon ridge. He turned, dark eyes locking onto hers, reading her with that same intensity she had first noticed during the ambush. I will not return," she said, her voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. "Not to him. Not to anyone who would see me as theirs. Choose you." For a long moment, Taza said nothing. The wind carried the sound of distant hooves, and the air shimmered with tension and expectation. He studied her, the shadows of the canyon playing across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw and the depth of his dark eyes. Finally, his lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You?" "Stay," he said, his broken English deliberate. "Not take, not forced. You choose. I honor." Evelyn's heart lifted, and something inside her shifted. This was not mere survival, not mere safety. This was respect, recognition, love, though neither of them had dared to name it fully. For the first time, she felt the raw, terrifying thrill of being truly seen. Taza was not a man to control her. He was a man who offered strength, protection, and the freedom to make her own choice. And in that freedom, Evelyn's soul seemed to stretch and breathe for the first time in her life. The canyon, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary. Every jagged cliff, every red-dusted ridge, every whispering wind carried the promise of a future she could claim. She understood, deep in her heart, that the coming battle with Hayes was inevitable, but whatever happened, she would face it not as a pawn, not as a victim, but as a woman who had chosen where her heart belonged. Taza stepped closer. The distance between them charged yet respectful. His hand hovered near hers, a silent offering of connection. She did not shy away. Their fingers brushed, a spark igniting in the heat of the fading sun. "You are mine only by choice," he said softly, the weight of the words more powerful than any promise. "And I am yours by choice," Evelyn replied, the words leaving her lips with certainty as the sun dipped behind the canyon walls. Casting the camp in a deep golden glow, Evelyn realized that her life had shifted forever. The man who had saved her, who had protected her, who had shown her honor and strength, had also captured her heart completely. And for the first time, she understood the meaning of love, unbound love chosen freely, fiercely, and irrevocably. The morning air was thick with dust and anticipation. From the ridge overlooking the canyon, Evelyn could see the glint of steel and the rise and fall of mounted soldiers, the cavalry of General Hayes, advancing steadily toward the Apache camp. Every man and woman in the camp moved with precise urgency, yet beneath their calm, a current of fear pulsed. Taza stood at the front, his dark eyes scanning the horizon, calculating, commanding. The warriors looked to him not only for strategy, but for courage, for the unspoken certainty that he would lead them through whatever fire awaited. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, not with fear alone, but with the knowledge that she had chosen to stand beside this man against overwhelming odds, against the world she had once known. The first clash came suddenly. Arrows sang through the air, striking with deadly accuracy. Taza moved like lightning, his bow releasing shot after shot, each one precise, each one lethal. Soldiers fell from their horses, thrown into the red dust of the canyon floor, while his warriors surged forward, striking with disciplined ferocity. Evelyn watched from the ridge, caught between awe and terror. The warrior who had captured her heart was now a storm of controlled violence, commanding his people, shielding the vulnerable, yet never losing sight of her. She felt a pang of fear. What if he were hurt? But that fear was inseparable from the admiration and love she had come to feel. Then came the direct challenge. General Hayes, galloping ahead of his men, raised his sword and shouted a command. His intent was clear: to strike down Taza and reclaim what he considered his prize. The two men met at the center of the battlefield, a collision of wills and strength. Taza's bow clattered to the ground, and he drew a heavy spear, spinning it with deadly precision. Every move spoke of training, instinct, and raw power. Evelyn held her breath as she watched the fight. Taza parried, struck, dodged, and countered with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural, each strike calculated, controlled, and devastating. Yet in the midst of combat, she saw fleeting glimpses of the man she had come to love, his eyes scanning for threats. His every movement tempered with the desire to survive and protect. Arrows and dust clouded the battlefield, but Taza never wavered. At last, with a combination of skill, strategy, and raw strength, he forced Hayes to retreat. Disarmed and humiliated, his pride shattered. The remaining soldiers faltered, some surrendering, others fleeing into the canyon's maze-like pathways. The Apache camp had held, and victory belonged to those who had fought for freedom. for home, and for the woman who had chosen to stand beside them. After the battle, the camp settled into tense relief. Fires burned brighter that night, tending the wounded, celebrating survival, and honoring courage. Evelyn approached Taza, her heart still racing from the fear and thrill of the day. He turned, dark and imposing, yet there was a softness in his gaze reserved only for her. "You." "Alive," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Alive," he replied, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "Because you stay." Evelyn stepped closer, her hand brushing his. The dust of the battlefield clung to both of them, but in that touch there was no dirt. No danger, only the connection they had forged through fear, trust, and choice. "You protected more than me," she whispered. "You protected everyone. Your home. Your people. And me." Taza's eyes softened, the warrior's mask melting for a fleeting moment. "Because worth fight for," he said, voice low and in that quiet. Among the red dust and fading sun, Evelyn realized something profound. Victory had been won not just by strength, but by heart, by courage, by the man she loved. For the first time, she felt the full weight and thrill of the life she had chosen, and the man who would always stand by her side. The dust of battle had settled, leaving the canyon quiet except for the soft crackle of fires and the distant murmur of tending hands. The Apache camp, though weary, buzzed with a sense of triumph, not only for surviving the day, but for defending the life, land, and freedom they held sacred. Evelyn stood at the edge of the ridge, the red earth stretching beneath her like an endless promise, and felt a rush of awe, relief, and something far deeper. Belonging Taza emerged from the camp, his dark silhouette framed by the golden glow of sunset. His movements were deliberate, calm, yet powerful. Every step a reminder of the man who had captured her heart and protected everyone she had come to care about. Evelyn's pulse quickened as he approached, the air between them heavy with everything left unspoken. "You?" "Safe," he said simply, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight of pride and relief. "I am," Evelyn replied, meeting his gaze. She felt the intensity of his eyes, the strength behind them, and yet beneath that strength lay a tenderness she had never known. "Because of you, Taza, you protected us." "And me." He studied her silently, then reached out, placing his large, calloused hand over hers. It was a touch of assurance, of promise, of intimacy earned through trials neither of them could have imagined. "Because worth fight for," he said, his broken English simple yet profound. As if the words themselves carried centuries of truth, Evelyn's heart swelled. She realized that in this place among the red cliffs, the wide sky, and the people who had welcomed her, she had found the life she had always longed for. She was free, not only from the chains of duty and expectation, but from fear, from doubt, and from a past that had never belonged to her. "Then I stay," she said softly, the words carrying the weight of her choice, her defiance, and her love. "Not because I have to, but because I want to. With you." A faint smile tugged at Taza's lips, the first warmth of emotion breaking through the stoic warrior mask he had worn for so long. He bowed his head slightly, brushing his fingers against hers. "Then, yours by choice," he replied. The camp around them seemed to exhale, the warriors, elders, and children going about their routines with a renewed sense of peace. The threat of General Hayes had been repelled, but more importantly, a new chapter had begun, a chapter defined not by fear, oppression, or obligation, but by freedom, trust, and love. Evelyn stepped closer, the warmth of Taza's presence enveloping her. The canyon wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, earth, and the wild flowers that grew along the cliffs. She rested her head briefly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and realized that in all the chaos, all the fear, and all the battles fought, she had found the one man who understood her not as a possession, not as a pawn, but as a person, a woman, a partner. Taz's arm went around her shoulders, strong and protective, yet gentle. "Free," he said, almost to himself, his eyes scanning the land they had fought for. "Always free." "Yes," Evelyn whispered, lifting her gaze to meet his. "Free, here, with you?" As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Evelyn and Taza stood together, silhouetted against the vast canyon. Their hearts beat in quiet unison, bound not by obligation, but by choice, by the fierce, unyielding force of love that had grown in the red earth, amidst the dust, the danger, and the fire of the Wild West. And in that moment, the world felt right. A life reclaimed. A love claimed. A new beginning forged in the land of red earth.